We are rounding to the end of the school year, and I think it can't come soon enough for parents, for teachers, and for kids.
I was just saying to someone, I don't know a parent or a teacher who's not exhausted. This has been such a grueling year, a year for great empathy for one another and just to be in a place of support for one another.
What has pandemic schooling in Michigan this past year shown us about education?
Yeah, I mean, one, I think it's shown us like how critical in-person learning and teachers are. There's really no substitute. And I think for so many kids who have lost so much learning because they weren't in school, they just didn't have that option. It really underscores how critical public education is for us as a society, and not just for kids and families, but for even our economy. I think that another thing that we've seen is just how dramatic the disparities are, the inequities that we have. Some districts and schools had the ability to offer both in-person virtual learning at the same time as often in-person learning throughout the same school year. That takes a lot of capacity and resources that many public schools don't have. And yet there were other places where the gaps in terms of digital access and internet access were just so dramatic.
Now we're in this really interesting place here in Michigan. We have better than expected school aid funding revenues. And then we've got the American Rescue Plan money. The governor has proposed closing the per pupil funding gaps, putting more money into special education, school psychologists and social workers, and also to school infrastructure. That budgeting process, of course, is not complete. Are we on the right path of where we want to spend this money that we now find ourselves having in the state?
A lot of focus on closing gaps between affluent districts and high poverty districts, more money for counselors, for school psychologists, the kinds of supports that are going to be needed as kids go back to school this year, recovering from the emotional and social toil that the pandemic has taken. I think we'll see in many districts a focus on summer learning and Saturday schools to help kids catch up, which will be essential to address the unfinished learning that has occurred over the last year. What will be important is what happens next summer and the following summer, making the most of these federal stimulus dollars to focus in on what kids need and not only what, say, like facilities may need, if facilities need air conditioning to hold summer school. Again, the pandemic has shown that there's no substitute for a highly skilled, highly qualified, experienced teacher. A 15, 16-year-old doing tutoring is not the same. And so thinking about how do we leverage these funds to address the significant teacher turnover that we're seeing in high poverty districts in particular. How do we make sure that we're closing the teacher salary gap that we see between high poverty and affluent school districts?
You started talking a little bit about teachers and the study that Education Trust Midwest did talking about teacher turnover. And there are concerns about teacher retirements and that this year has maybe changed the way teachers think about their job. What is the stress that we have seen on teachers and how do you think that's going to impact the next 5 years of what is happening in the classroom?
We really need to address and how do we attract and retain teachers across the state? Particularly in working class, in rural and urban school districts that, again, there are these really huge differences in what the salaries that they can pay compared to, say, a Birmingham or East Grand Rapids or a Troy, right? Those districts can often afford to pay their teachers much more. We have to address the kind of conditions that teachers that face. We have to address the kind of capacity and supports that they have. If a school doesn't have a school counselor, for example, teachers are often tasked with doing the work of what a school counselor would do on top of their regular teaching and homework and grading load.
What kind of pressure will there be to help kids move along and to meet certain benchmarks now?
So I think there'll be a lot of pressure on parents and schools to address this unfinished learning. And I think, again, the challenge will be in the places where kids have been out of school the most. or just had challenges with accessing virtual content. For example, English language learners, we know, based on national research, were some of the kids that lost the most online instruction because often the platforms were only in English. And if their parent didn't speak English, they couldn't translate for them. That left them far behind. Students with disabilities, students that did not have consistent internet access. So again, as we look toward this new school year, really it will be critical for local districts to be thinking about how are they using their federal stimulus dollars. I think it's important for all of us to keep in mind, if your child lost months of in-person learning, it won't be completed overnight. It will take time. And in fact, it might take 2 and 3 years. And that's why the Biden administration structured the stimulus dollars the way that it did, so that districts have time to spend those dollars down. It's just too much money to spend down quickly. And so it will be important for us to think strategically as a state and in families, and then in collaboration with children's teachers and principals about how we can work together as partners to address that unfinished learning. I think another important piece will be community-based organizations. There are terrific organizations out there that specialize in things like reading tutoring, that specialize in summer instruction and camps. So camps may be reimagined. Camps that may have been, fun and games and swimming all day might have a couple hours of reading instruction in the morning. And that will be important for state government to invest in over the next 2 years to help community-based organizations be part of the solution.